There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind.
It was basically a cube with inside of a sphere where the points of the cube were touching outside of the sphere.
Roger. There's troubleshooting machines out here.
So this isn't anything that just is limited to the United States. It's a worldwide phenomenon.
Billionaire John Caldwell once said, "If I'm lucky, I only get recruitment wrong 70% of the time. But how is it we accept being wrong so much of the time? With the cost of finding the right match for both people and organisations so high, it's imperative that you choose the right team to help you on that path." Recruitrix is one of the fastest growing recruitment companies in the UK. With an expert team of dedicated, passionate, high experienced professionals, they are the perfect choice to make sure you get it right, first time, every time. With a range of departments covering almost all sectors, it doesn't matter if you need a highly specialised IT professional, a boots-on-the-ground salesperson, accountant, mechanical engineer, or anything else, they have the expert team in-house to ensure you find the resources you need. As a friend of the podcast, they will offer all new organisations wanting to give them a try heavily discounted fees to 10% of per annum salary, representing an enormous saving compared to the rest of the market. Just visit recruitrix.co.uk, that's recruitix.co.uk, leave your details, tell them the podcast sent you, and one of their expert team will be in touch. Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO podcast. My name is Andy, and welcome to the week-long, I don't want to call it a celebration, but it's the week-long anniversary of the 2 years since I started That UFO podcast. We started the week with the interview with Lou Elizondo, which you will have heard by now, and we're finishing off the week with an interview about remote viewing, which is one of the initial subjects I put in the description of the podcast when I first started it, long before I'd done any interviews on remote viewing. Since then, I've spoken to several remote viewers, and I'm very excited to welcome Daz Smith, who is an artist and graphic designer, an author, an active remote viewer who continuously works with the top people in the field on both public and private remote viewing projects. He also runs several large information websites on the subject of remote viewing, and he edits and publishes 8 Martinis, which is a print and online magazine dealing with the subject of remote viewing. That's just half the bio as well. So the rest of it, I'll let you check out yourselves online, or I would be here all day. Daz, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, yeah, and it's great to be here. As I may have mentioned, I listen to the podcast quite often, so yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I know Dan, regular co-host, a big fan of yours as well, so he was looking forward to speaking to you. As we record this, he is on a live with Vinny from Disclosure Team as well, so Dan sends his regards over. Very popular guest, as I got a ton of listener questions. I've tried to build as many of them into the interview as possible. We've then got the listener questions section as well. We'll get through what we can, but I think I've got to start at the beginning, and we've spoken to a few remote viewers, like I've said, and people can go and check those interviews out in the archives. It's always a popular discussion. I want to ask you, in your own words, what is remote viewing?
Oh, well, yeah. The simple answer for that is it's when an intuitive uses their intuitive ability to see outside local space. So they're allowed, they essentially move their consciousness away from themselves to a remote location, and they can see targets, which consist of events, locations, life forms, objects, structures, anywhere in time and space.
So you can look at not only now, but future and in past as well, yeah?
We can, yes. And the past targets are very accurate. Now targets are very accurate, but we do lose accuracy on looking at future targets. I'm running at probably around about 65% accuracy on looking at targets in the future at the moment.
Now, I know there's a listener question, at least on future targets and predictions coming up, so we'll get to that. I want to know, Daz, how did remote viewing first become a part of your life? I'm right in saying you began training as such at a very young age, about 10 years old?
Yeah. I trained in what I call classical or psychic techniques from 10 years old, and that was techniques like normal clairvoyance, mediumship, channeling, using all the divination methods, tarot cards, crystal balls, sand reading, tea leaving. So pretty much anything I could get my hands on back then. And then I was very much into, and I always have been into UFO research as well. And I was a local UFO researcher here in the UK from around about the 1989 period when crop circles came about. We had a big explosion in the UK here. And I started getting heavily into UFO research back then, collecting books and videos. And I went to a UFO conference in Leeds, which was run by Quest International. And they had a person on stage who played an audio tape. And it was a taped conversation with someone who claimed he was in or part of Majestic 12. And he was a remote viewer. And, in this audio tape that he played live on stage, this remote viewer was talking about how he was a psychic and he was trained by the CIA and the American military to essentially spy on the Russians and to go anywhere in time and space. And he tracked UFOs to their point of origin and construction using this. So in the moment I heard that, being a semi-trained psychic anyway, I was hooked, and I've been exploring this ever since in the 25 years since.
Now, 10 years old is quite a young age to start anything as serious as what you've done. What kind of sparked that interest at such a young time of your life?
Unlike most of the people out there that are interested in remote viewing, I was quite lucky in that I was brought up in a household where my mother was she ran the local spiritualist church. So we had a library of books, and it had all the usual ones, like the encyclopedias and all that kind of stuff in there. But the majority of the books we had and the subjects that people talked about in my house growing up were the paranormal, esoteric type subjects. And I guess I just caught the bug from my mother's side of the family, and I was hooked from the age of 10. I remember being at a junior school at the age of 10, and going repeatedly to the shelves to get the same books, and it was 3 books. One was on ghosts, one was on UFOs, and one was on mysterious creatures. And I would repeat the books and then go back through them and repeat them again and keep reading them.
I think a lot of listeners will share that same sort of memory and same experience growing up as well. What was the earliest time you remember either remote viewing or a related ability or experience really catching your attention, being that kind of wow moment? Was it a family member or was it yourself?
It was probably some experiences that we had growing up in the house I lived in before I lived in this one now, and I've lived here for 40 odd years now. It was my parents' house, but the first house we lived in, I think I lived there to the age of 7. I vaguely remember that we had some very strong paranormal experiences and disturbances in the house. So it was very, very much like poltergeist type stuff. So the family would all be downstairs, and we would hear someone up above us running in the rooms upstairs, but there would obviously be no one there. So I think that started, I remember that kind of stuff happening, and that must be from around about the age of 5, 6, and 7, I would say.
And again, as a child, I'm going to ask, I've spoken to experiencers and other remote viewers. At times you hear about traumatic events at childhood or injuries that spurned these things on. Is this something that has been, that came on, or was it very much a natural ability and something you harnessed?
Yeah, I don't think I have any trauma in that sparked this. I think mine is, it comes from the family line, I would say. I know my mother was psychic, and she was psychical and trained people and did all kinds of divination till she pretty much passed. And I think I recollect hearing stories of my grandmother down the line having some kind of basic skills as well. So for me, it's just a trait that's in the family line. And I got a brother and sister, but I'm pretty much the only one that is that followed this line, even though I know they have some basic ability themselves.
And you mentioned it started off with tea leaves and various different types of reading, mediumship. At what point did you really move over? You've mentioned obviously remote viewing, you saw someone and that sparked an interest. How did you begin to hone that yourself and really focus on growing those skills?
Absolutely. Well, as I said, I first heard about remote viewing in 92, and then I started to look into it a bit more. But you have to bear in mind that was in the early days of the internet, so we were all using 56k modems at 4k a second back then. Yeah. And there wasn't a lot of information out because the project in its majority was still secret at that point until 1995. So I managed to get a few bits and pieces online. to point me in the right direction. But it didn't really take off for me and everyone else until it exploded in 1995 when Nightline did a program on remote viewing and recognized it and said, this is what the CIA have been spending money on. And then after that, it kind of grew online into separate little communities that I joined, and it kind of exploded from me from there, really. And what I found was when I was training in the classical techniques, so, clairvoyance and all that kind of stuff, it's very archaic, it's very spontaneous. The process controls you, and it controls the direction when you get the information, how you get it. The genius thing about remote viewing and the method that I use, which is called controlled remote viewing, is that I choose the situation. So like if I wanted to right now, I could say, okay, I'm going to do remote viewing right now. I could sit here with a stack of paper and a pen, or I more often use a tablet nowadays, and just do it. And I'm in control. I decide how much information I want to get, when I want to stop, and everything. So it's a control thing, really. Classical ways I find too spontaneous. The structured remote viewing that came out of the CIA and the military, I find way more structured for me.
Now, I've mentioned on the podcast a few times, in terms of remote viewing, one of my early experiences as such was seeing the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats, which is largely fictional. It's a Hollywood film, big budget, pretty funny. I enjoy it. However, there is a warning at the start of the film which tells you more of this is true than you would believe.
Yep.
Now, it does portray remote viewers as eccentric telepaths, each with almost superpowers, different techniques. Is that the case in any way? And what does an actual remote viewing session look like?
Yeah, I mean, that was a parody, but there is a lot of reality in there. They mixed a lot of the names up and the characters up, but they do resemble real people within the remote viewing community. And in the early days of remote viewing, there were several different projects ongoing in several different military departments that looked at different things. So, there is some good evidence that they did try to stop the heart of a goat and that kind of thing. But that wasn't part of the, I would say, the main effort that happened. SRI and the other labs. So it's semi-true, but it's entertaining.
An actual remote viewing session, you mentioned it would be paper and pencil, whereas you use a tablet, which is a lovely a modern take on the remote viewing sessions you would see within the kind of films and TV or even documentaries. So for you, could you just go into a little bit more detail on if you're going to sit down and remote view a target, what that looks like, the process, and obviously bringing in the tablet and everything as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So what would happen is we always work blind. So it means, as a remote viewer, I know nothing about anything specific about target whatsoever. So I would get an email from a project manager, and I only use trusted project managers because, this is a possible tool that could be corrupted. So I'll get an email from a project manager would say, okay, your target number is, and then it would be a random number. And the number doesn't really mean anything. I don't need it in reality. But what it does is it gives us something, it gives us a title for admin purposes, so that if we have to talk by email, we can refer to it by a project name. So they'll make up a random number and they'll assign it to a target. And the number I may get might be something like 7829-9920. And they'll say to me, you've got a week to do this, get your data back to me by end of, 29th of April. And that's it. So they'll give me that as a target. Then I will then sit down. In the past, I used to sit down with a stack of paper and a pen, but now I just use a tablet. And what I do is I run through a specific 6-stage process. And this 6-stage process came out of Stanford Research Institute and the American military, and it's called CRV, or Controlled Remote Viewing. And essentially what I do in that 6-stage process, it starts off with a very small aperture to the target. And each stage you go to, stage 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, is almost like seeing this camera aperture to the target open wider and wider and wider with the data that flows in. And it's very technical. It's very structured in the way you put your information down. And that's essentially what I do. So I'll sit there for an hour working away on my tablet, probably doing something like 10 to 30 A4 pages of information, which I then, once I finish, I will the good thing about doing it on a tablet is the moment I finished it, it saves as a PDF, so I can email it straight to the client. Whereas in the past, myself and other remote viewers that are still using the technique of paper, you have to scan all the paper in, then you have to make it in PDF. It's a lot longer doing it that old way, which is why I moved to tablets. I do so much remote viewing now for clients that I have to be more efficient, and a tablet's great for that nowadays.
How detailed can you be with a result? And I've spoken to remote viewers, and I've obviously in looking online and basic research, some will say they can be pretty accurate in terms of detail. They could read from paper. Others would say it's more of a sketch and an outline where, for example, I know you've been involved as well in remote viewing what the 9/11 attacks ultimately were. And you'll see people, they won't draw the Twin Towers and the fireball, but there'll be something that resembles that scene.
Yeah.
And it's not always that 100%. How do you distinguish that accuracy, or is it something that just comes and goes depending on the event you're trying to view?
Yeah, the accuracy does change target to target, and it also depends on who's tasking the target, because we know there seems to be some kind of connection at some level between the person that's created the target and the remote viewer. You know, it might be almost like what they call the experimenter effect. But yeah, myself, because I've been doing this consistently now, using the same technique for 25 years, and I had a natural talent in the first place, I'm just lucky enough to be able to get very accurate data for targets. And for example, you know, I mean, there's nothing I or any other remote viewer can't do. If the target's a life or a person, I can go inside their head, get their thoughts, past, present, or future. You know, if the target's a location, I can go anywhere at a target. There doesn't seem to be any limitations to remote viewing that we know of.
And can anyone begin to remote view? 25 years honing those skills is a very long time.
Yeah.
But like you say, you have that natural intuition beforehand anyway. What about someone who's picking up this podcast, who's listened for a few months, obviously has an interest in UFOs, maybe quite new to the subject, hears about remote viewing for the first time, and there'll be those people who are right now. How could they go about themselves starting the remote viewing process and beginning to learn about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's my belief that everyone can do this, but we will all be able to do it to differing levels of skill level. You know, like we can all run, but I'm never going to be able to run 100 meters really fast. It's just not within me to do that. So we can all do it. I have resources on my website that people could do. You know, I have essentially a training video and a template that they could watch and go through, and they can essentially teach themselves to do a remote viewing session in something like 30 minutes. So it's very easy to do. It only gets more complicated and more time constraining when you learn a methodology like I have and you take it a lot more serious. But, you know, the normal person out there could use very basic remote viewing skills to make very basic decisions for themselves. You know, things like finding your car keys or finding a car park space, or even just making a decision, you know, because essentially all it is intuition, instinct, and even gut instinct. CEOs, they do really well in business by making gut instinct decisions, and that's all remote viewing is. Other than the remote viewing we do, it's called ASTIS remote viewing because we do it within what we call the scientific protocol, and that differentiates it from all other psychic experiments. And the protocol means it's never spontaneous; it's always a planned project. It's always done blind, so the remote viewer does not know the target, and they don't have anyone in their vicinity or in communication with them when they're doing the remote viewing who knows what the target is as well. The data is always recorded, so you can check it later. And then you have a level of feedback at the end of the target, which then allows you to take it side by side with the remote viewing data and check it and give it a score for accuracy. So that's that. You know, those rules or protocols we call them are what makes remote viewing rather than any other psychic discipline.
I'm going to skip ahead slightly and we'll bring forward one of the listener questions. It's a very good place to ask it, I think, from Paul Eyre. And he wants to know, what is your own personal best remote viewing event or experience? By this, I mean what immediately springs to mind as a time where your remote viewing skills brought a definite and positive result.
Oh, there's so many. Because there's that's a hard one because there literally is so many. the positive benefits are for me all the time. For example, the last 4 years, myself and 4 other remote viewers have been working in a project called Crypto Viewing. And we have subscribers there who pay us for information. And what we do is we provide intuitive information on cryptocurrencies, markets, news predictions, and we do the occasional mysteries target in there as well for them. But by using that data, not on its own, but with other data as well, that information I provided myself through looking at cryptocurrency markets, I've made my personal investment, which was terrible. I had no money 2 years ago. But in the 2 years that I've been investing my very small amount of available money that I can, based on my crypto remote viewing, I've increased my personal investment by 600%. And you can't get that from a bank or in any other way. So that's a personal benefit for me. But I do have remote viewing sessions which were absolutely amazing as well, which blew me away. But I couldn't pick a single one. They're all good. Area 51, Roswell.
Well, I was going to ask, but given it's that UFO podcast, there's going to be listeners thinking, let's hear some UFO related stuff. Could you give us one of those? Area 51 and Roswell jump out as being massive names.
Yeah.
What sort of things have you remote viewed? Why did you remote view those? And what's your takeaways?
Yeah, all the targets I do are always blind, so I don't know what the target is when it's given to me. And being a person interested in UFOs, some of those targets, like Roswell, I've been waiting years for someone to blindly task me with that target, and it was only something like 4 years ago that Courtney Brown from the Farsight Institute, he was the very first person that tasked me on looking at Roswell, and I worked a project with another co-worker of mine on various projects called Dick Augar. We worked it for the Farsight Institute, and we got some amazing data, which absolutely corresponds with some of the famous testimonies out there, some of the Jesse Marcel stuff, all the other ones, the Corso testimony and what he said he did and saw, all that kind of stuff. So we had really good data, and it is available online. It's on my, I put it online for free. With as well, they can actually look at the paper, because what I did on some of these projects, I start off on paper or on tablet, do several hundred pages of information, and then the project manager will say to me at some point, okay, you finished that now let's get something on video, do it live on whiteboard. And then I move to whiteboard and I do my remote viewing live in front of a video camera. Mm-hmm. And that's the case with the Roswell and the other UFO ones that I have on my website for people to watch, and they can download and view the paper sessions in full as well.
And I'll get the links to those in the description. With Roswell, for example, are you RVing the crash, the scene? Is it glimpses? Is it more like a video that you see when you're actually remote viewing?
It was if I remember correctly, I think the target was Crash at Corona in 1947, and it had a few details there. But yeah, it was essentially the crash event, and at one point in the RV, I do sketch how and why the craft came down and embedded in the land, and then the aftermath of it. So with remote viewing, I can move my because I'm in control, I move myself around the target. So after, say, 20 sheets of paper, I kind of know that it was an aerial object that came down and crashed. I kind of built up that impression by that stage. So then I'm a bit like a psychic detective. I move myself around so that I would, if I knew it was a structure that crashed, I would then give myself a movement command, something like, now move inside the structure and describe. So I would move inside it and I would describe how, what went wrong, the makeup of it, the environment, and so on. And yeah, so, by doing these movement commands, and I probably did 5 or 6 on that one, moving myself inside the life forms to describe the life forms and so on. By doing that, you build up a really big general picture of the targets.
You mentioned that you'd waited a long time for someone to give you that target. That was when you were looking forward to remote viewing. Why can't you set yourself that target in remote viewing as something, if it's a Saturday evening, you've got some time and you've got a good headspace and you think, I really want to get inside an event like Roswell. Yeah. Is it something you can do? Is there a way to do it? Or is it just it works better with that gift of the target?
Some people do try to do it in the way that they set themselves their own personal target pools. So what they'll do, they'll write down the target on a sheet of paper, and they'll seal it inside an envelope, write a random number on the front, and then they'll do that, and they'll do that 50, 100 times. So they'll have a box of 50 or 100 targets, which but I won't do that. I'm a bit more aggressive. I won't take that approach and do my own, because I still believe that even if you have a box of 250 envelopes of targets that you've set yourself, at some level, somewhere in your head, you know what targets you've set, you know what's in that box there somewhere. So I won't work that way. I want to be, I'm a bit more of a purist on this.
You're almost giving yourself a bias that you want that to be a target, or like you say, it's there, so you've got an inkling, and would that not necessarily give you that kind of clear mind?
Absolutely. And why you can't set the target yourself, and I can use an example. Let's say, for example, the target would be the Eiffel Tower. We all know what the Eiffel Tower looks like. We all know it's in Paris. We all know it's a tourist attraction. We all know it's made out of metal, and it's like a tower that moves upwards, in a concave motion. So how do you score that information? What information could you provide about the Eiffel Tower that you could score that you didn't already know? That's why we have to work blind.
I suppose, though, let me come back on that one. As someone who, again, like people ask me regularly, what event would you love to witness? And I suppose I do say Roswell. Now, I've got in my head from various TV shows, movies, books, that scene being played out in different ways. As a remote viewer, though, would you say you could remote view an event that you've never seen, the genuine event? Or again, would that bias potentially be there because you already have seen the movies, the TV shows, and you've built up a picture beforehand?
It's a good question. I think that undoubtedly we can remote view things that we've never seen or experienced before. I do think, though, that it's also possible for remote viewers to remote view belief systems or myths that have built up about certain things as well. Because the myth over, I don't say the myth, but the stories and the mythology about a big target like Roswell. We have 70 years worth of mythology and theories and counter theories, and that exists at some level of human consciousness. So I do believe that it's just as easy for a remote viewer to pick up on the actual real target as much as it is. We can also pick up on a fallacy about that target, or something that's not actually real about that target. So the only way to determine if the remote viewer is accurate or not is having enough feedback information to then assess what the remote viewer says for accuracy.
I can understand that. You mentioned people and organisations have approached you in the past to do work for them. How does that process go? Where do they find a remote viewer as such? Can you speak on some of the organisations and types of work you've done as well?
Yeah. I've done huge amounts of projects over the years. I did 250 plus missing persons cases for a group called Find Me in America, and that was essentially for pretty much, I would say at one point or another, pretty much every police, state police force in America at some level. And this was generally on code cases. They have nowhere else to go, so they go to a group of psychics that are run by an ex-DEA agent. So you have that law enforcement connection there anyway. And we worked, as I said, I worked 250 missing persons cases over a period of 5 years for them.
What sort of success, I hate interrupting, but what sort of success rate did you have with that, working on those 250 cases?
I did have the stats on that. It's not a huge amount because, there are just a vast amount of people around the globe that just disappear and they're never seen again. But if I remember correctly, I believe the latest stats that were given to me by the Find Me group was something like 3% in finding people.
I think even one person, that's one person that might not have been found without that. So that's still pretty incredible.
We're not saying it's an ideal situation. Police and families have nowhere else to go, so why not? And we do have, and I have many records from police chiefs and some of these organizations, saying, okay, thank you, you did help us find this person. in most cases, when we do find people and they've been missing for a while, we have to be honest. They're more often than not deceased in some way or another. But we do have, and I have personal letters from police chiefs saying, we found this person's body, and so it gave closure to the family. And we only did so because of you guys as a team providing. And what we do is we provide GPS coordinates. So we work blind. The police say, here's your number. And we do our thing. We provide a GPS coordinate. They go there, and if the person's there or not, then it's good and bad.
On your own YouTube channel, you interviewed Nick Cook, and you had mentioned on that interview that you were hired by Tom DeLonge and To the Stars Academy for a project. I'd like to ask you about that. Is it ongoing? What did it involve?
Yes, I spoke to them for a while, and it was a project where. Because I wanted to be involved, I stepped back from project managing it and hired a project manager as the go-between between myself and them. Myself and a team of, I think, something like 10 or 12 remote viewers worked on the project for Tom DeLonge. And it was a UAP-related project. I could probably say it's a future-related UAP project. Bearing in mind, we did it probably 2 years ago now as well. And altogether, I was slightly informed on that one, not so blind in the fact that I knew who the client was. Because, he contacted me first. But myself and all the other data that I've seen from the other remote viewers, because I have a full report on it, it all overlaps and corresponds and, highlights each other as well. So very good, consistent data. And it's data consistent with typical UAP craft and the occupants that are driving, flying. This is where it gets complicated in this project, in this subject for me, because they're not so much driving the craft; they're symbiotically connected to the craft. So we detailed all that kind of stuff, and my sketches alone, I could probably offline and stuff show you my sketches. I detail the occupants, their brain structure, the structure of their hands, their bone structure, how they integrate with this craft, how the craft, the layers of the craft, how the craft drives, works, or we can get pretty much anything we need for the client.
And were you given a reason that you can divulge that they wanted you to do this?
No, I didn't. I got the barest minimum of information. Yeah.
And is that something that was a work that was done and complete, and you've moved on? Yep.
Yeah, it was a month-long or so project. We, as I said, 10 remote viewers or more, 10 or 11 remote viewers worked it, and a project manager. It was all paid work, so everyone was paid for their participation. We gave a report. I know the report went to Tom, and Tom shared it with the other guys involved at the time, How Put Off and all the others. And that's it. I do occasionally speak to Tom. I occasionally share my other UFO research remote viewing projects with him as well, and he likes to comment on those. So we do have a small ongoing dialogue, but no other projects since.
It's nice to hear that someone does still speak to Tom on the UFO subject, because he doesn't speak to many people on it, does he? That seems to have gone awfully quiet as of the last couple of years. Talking about your prediction work before, I'd like to touch back on that. What have been some of the successes outside of the missing persons stuff that you've worked with that? I think you said 65%, which is a phenomenal hit rate on anything, which is a kind of blind. I suppose it's well above your 50-50 and would be a lucky guess, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I'm happy with the predictive stuff that I do. And it is around about 65%. And what I can do is I can give you a link to all my correct predictive news hits for the year 2020. So I put them all online on my website, so someone can see all the ones that I actually got correct on there. And there's probably about 60 to 100 all within the one page.
Any particular highlights for you?
Oh, there's just so many. I mean, one really good highlight is one that I posted on Facebook and Twitter and everything today that I had. Because what we do in crypto viewing is myself and the other 3 to 4 remote viewers, every month we always look a month ahead to see what the top news is going to be. So in March, we all did our remote viewing sessions and recorded it on camera, where we looked at what the top news for April would be. And one of my, I usually do around about 10 predictions, so I do things like what Bitcoin's going to do, what the market's going to do, top news in the US, top news in the UK, this kind of thing. And one of my predictions was that there was going to be an incident with a big warship, and there was going to be an impact from the warship, and it was going to be all messy, and there was going to be an underwater element, all this kind of stuff. And I drew this big grey warship. Of course, we had the sinking of the flagship warship from Russia a few days back. So yeah, that's a big hit. And in 4 years of doing this, I don't think I've ever, because I have to track the news to see how accurate we are. I don't think I've ever seen anything. In fact, I've been told the other day that there hasn't been a sinking of a warship of this size since World War II. So, it's not like it's an everyday occurrence for a warship to be in the news and it being sunk.
Absolutely. And I want to ask, is there any issue of sensitivity as part of predicting events? Because are you potentially going to see, for example, a warship being sunk results in a loss of life? However, that's still, relatively speaking, a vague prediction, because you're not naming people or, locations that other people could potentially see and think, oh God, that's me. Again, to use a crude example, 9/11, to remote view that in advance, which people have claimed to have done, that's quite an upsetting thing for people to hear. So how do you go about that sensitive part of the prediction?
Yeah, as a business, as the crypto viewing business, we censor a lot of the material we put out. We do a lot more remote viewing internally than we actually release to our paid members at times. For example, in 2019, right into the early parts of 2020, we were doing lots of remote viewing projects when we were looking ahead at future events in the US. And it was big events like the Macy Day Parade and stuff. And we'd be getting these targets. And none of us as remote viewers would be recording any information about people, anything on the streets or anything. We couldn't understand. In 2019, we couldn't understand why in 2020 we were getting nothing happening for the Macy's Day Parade and stuff. Now that intrigued us, and we thought something very big, was going to happen. We didn't know what, but we knew something very big was going to happen because the Macy's Day Parade and others weren't on. But we couldn't release that information to the public because we didn't know how to classify it on. And we're very aware at the same time of not being people that sell predictions of doom, just to worry people to make money off it and stuff like that. So we are very particular on what we put out, and we do, and at times we do censor quite a bit of what we put out as well.
And just for anyone who forgets, 2020 COVID kicked off, hence there was no one in the streets,
there was
and
no one on
was
the streets.
grounded.
Yes, but at the time we didn't get that. But and because we didn't get it and we didn't know what was going to happen, we knew something big was going to happen, but we didn't know what exactly. We just didn't know what to do with the information, so we kept it all internal.
No, that's fair. I want to ask, this is one that Dan was talking to me about as well. Have you ever used training like the Monroe Hemi-Sync gateway experience to aid in your remote viewing or enhance those skills? Yeah,
I used it for a while in my early days of training, and it works very well. And a lot of the remote viewers that I work with and I hire on occasion, and even practice with and stuff, they still use those techniques themselves. I'm at a stage now where I do like to listen to music when I remote view, which is weird, but I tend to just stick any kind of classical music on. I use soundtracks, so I like the Interstellar soundtrack. And I like soundtracks because they have no singing in it, so there's no words. So, which I find is good because then it doesn't, make imagery form in my mind of from the words. But other remote viewers, yes, they definitely live and die by different Hemi-Syncs to get them in the right state of mind. Personally, after 25 years of doing this now, I literally just sit down like I would here at this desk now, and I would just like relax. I can internally relax myself in 5 seconds to get myself into the zone, because 25 years of doing something, you just learn to do that.
Yeah, I can appreciate the no words thing in the music. I've got a very active imagination in mind, and I struggle to even, trying, human initiated contact, C5, whatever it might be. I've always said on the podcast, one day I'll try it properly, and Dan's always telling me to, but I struggle to go outside and clear my head and look up and concentrate for that long. So
Yeah.
what kind of advice do you give to someone like me who's trying to do that and clear their head?
I would give everyone the advice just for better health, and for anything to do with remote viewing and psychic work. Any form of basic meditation, it's key. I would see key to my development. I did a lot of meditation for many years before I got into the remote viewing side of things, and the experiences I had for doing normal meditation, and the realms you see, the life forms you see, and just getting to know yourself in your body and feeling it relax and stuff. It's just so beneficial on so many levels, and it's so easy to do. You know, there's videos, apps, courses all over the place for doing this now. So there's no real excuse really to take, to not take 10 minutes out to meditate. And, it doesn't have to be an hour long meditation. You literally can do it for 10, 15 minutes at a time, and it'd be hugely beneficial for you.
Do you feel there's any link between remote viewing as a practice and things like astral projection, or you hear people talking about downloads and receiving downloads from entities?
Yeah, I think it's all how I class what we do with remote viewing and everything else I did in the past with the clairvoyance and channeling and mediumship. I see it like it's not, there's no delineation between all this. It's just like a huge spectrum of frequencies, if you can imagine it that way, or a huge spectrum of colors. And, where you just progress or move between these frequencies or colors. Yeah, that's the easiest way I can say it, really.
Some have spoken about encountering other entities whilst they remote view, especially when they're remote viewing space and putting themselves out there. Have you ever encountered anything like that? You mentioned the Roswell remote viewing, and you moved yourself into the bodies of other life forms.
Most targets, and this includes normal day-to-day targets, like when I'm doing the cryptos, I will look at the CEO of the crypto to see how they're doing, maybe move inside their mind to see what they're thinking at the time, that kind of thing. So we can do. It's not just non-physical life forms that we can interact with. We can interact with physical ones as well on many different levels. And you can do that without remote viewing. You can do that in channeling, in guided meditations, or anything. It's an amazing world out there. It's like there's this vast universe, and it's got so many layers to it. And each layer you encounter has a smorgasbord of different non-physical and physical life forms. It's just that, unfortunately, as humans, our physical eyes are blind to most of this.
And when you remote view any of these physical life forms, is there ever a connection the other way, that they're aware that you are there remote viewing them?
I only found that once, and that was in looking at the occupants in the craft that was the Phoenix Lights craft. That was the only time where I felt that even though I was looking at something like 10, 15 years after the event, it felt like there was a connection there, and they knew, it's very strange, you see, I'm remote viewing a target 15 years before, but it felt like the connection was direct from them being there at the time of looking at the target. So, it's a very huge conundrum from time, and a lot of remote viewers don't believe that time exists because of what we can do with remote viewing. But yeah, that was the only time I feel a connection. For me, we all have different belief systems within remote viewing. But for me, as a remote viewer, I'm not sure I actually believe or have seen any evidence in the hundreds of thousands of projects I've seen over 25 years. I haven't seen any evidence that we actually in any way travel to the targets. I think that all the information about everything in the known universe, past, present, future, is accessible and within all of us. So I think it's just information that's within me that I'm accessing at some level.
Now, the Phoenix Lights event is a particular favourite of mine, so I'd be remiss not to ask you for some more detail there. What was the background to remote viewing that particular target? And could you elaborate any more on the actual experience of the session?
Yeah, that was one of my favourites, because I actually did some really good sketches of a triangle-shaped craft above a city on that one. Again, it was a blind target given to me. I think, it was given to me by the Farsight Institute. Oh, it must be 10 years ago now. And again, it was blind. Myself, Dick Outlier, and I think another remote viewer worked that one. And we worked it on paper and then live on video. And we just had some amazing detail of a really advanced technology that was flying strangely over an urban location. And I did describe and draw this triangle shaped craft in great detail. And then, having some kind of conversation or interaction, I should say, that's a better word, interaction with the life forms that were involved in that event.
And what was that back and forward like, that connection? Was it verbal? Was it more of a feeling?
I do so many of these, to be honest. I can't remember all of it. I'd have to watch the video again. But I do vaguely remember that it was the only and first time that it wasn't just me getting information. It seemed to be me connected to an information pathway. It was more like there was a two-way connection. They knew I was getting information. They didn't seem to mind, but they didn't seem to... I'm trying to think of the right word. It's not that they weren't friendly. They were just vaguely neutral in it all. It was almost like I was an inconvenience. Yeah, I was an inconvenience to what they were doing. And maybe they were a bit intrigued as well that we were kind of looking at them in some way.
Sure. It sounds like when a child walks into the kitchen and you're cooking and you're like, I mean, you're not doing any harm,
Absolutely.
but I'd rather you weren't here.
Yeah. A bit like that. But if I remember correctly, we probably had that online in somewhere as well. So people can actually see the live on-camera remote viewing for all these projects, Area 51, Roswell. I think the Phoenix Lights is online in that regard as well.
That's one I'll go back and check out myself. What are some of the common misconceptions on remote viewing that you hear?
Yeah, the biggest one is, and it's all down to the name really, remote viewing, in that most people think remote viewing is like a stream of images in your mind. And in reality, I would say only 1 to 2% of the information I get is a visual piece of information. And that visual piece of information I will get is a bit like, I don't know what they're called, but when you look at a bright light and then you look away and you have that afterglow. That's the quality of the flash of visual information I'll get. It'd be like a quick millionth of a second afterglow that fastly dissipates. So that's how I get visual information. But the majority of the information for me, and it's sensory stuff, so it's like smell, taste, touch. I can do all that at the target. But for me, it's just I have an internal feeling that if I tasted the target, it would taste a certain way, or if I smelt the target, it would smell a certain way. So it's all just words that bubble up from my unconscious, hardly visual in any way.
I want to get into listener questions because it touches on some of the things I've not done any deep diving into yet with you. You mentioned earlier, you talked about time, and you've mentioned that many remote viewers and many other people who listen to this podcast, that time doesn't exist. Do you lean towards creation being multi-dimensional with multiple timelines? If so, how do you know if a target is from our timeline or another?
Again, that's a good question. I don't think science knows yet. Yeah, the biggest studies they did on remote viewing was the 22-year Stargate remote viewing study. And that was done at SRI involving the military. They spent from 72 to 95 and a tune of $22 million researching remote viewing. And they didn't, in all that time, they didn't come up with a theory of how remote viewing works. And today, even another 20 years on down the line again, I still see no evidence in any way of what's going on. No one has a clue about how remote viewing works or how time works. All we know is it doesn't seem to be as linear as past, present, and future as we like to think. Because I have recorded examples on my remote viewing online where the project managers come to me and says, "Okay, there is no target right now, but the event will happen in 30 days from now. But the event won't be chosen until another 30 days after that by someone who will go back, look through the news and pick it." But I was essentially doing my remote viewing for a target that didn't exist as an event for 30 days, and then it wasn't picked as a target for 60 days. And yet my remote viewing was still completely accurate on all those projects. I mean, how does that happen if I'm remote viewing a target that doesn't happen for 30 days and then it's not even picked by some random way by someone that I have no connection with 30 days after that, so 60 days later? It's mind-boggling how it works. We're just stuck in a conundrum at the moment as remote viewers, and it's it doesn't help in that the official program was finished in 1995 and there hasn't been any serious funding of remote viewing research and theories and mechanisms since. It does need a big study, almost like needs like Bob Bigelow to come along and say, yeah, let's do a remote viewing project study. Here's 10 million, hire the best people, sit down for a year or two and do it.
That question was from Jared that I forgot to mention. Just to follow up on that though, Daz, you mentioned the previous programs finished in 1995. Does it not give you some kind of hope, or have you ever had any incline that other projects have gone on in some capacity? We hear about OSAP and ATIP that obviously happened, and no one would have ever thought the US government would have had official acknowledgement of UFO programs, that there may have still been some aspect of a program going on in the background on remote viewing? Or do you think it would have to come from a more out there character like a Bob Bigelow?
Well, that's a really good question. A year ago, I would have said no, because I'm quite involved with quite a lot of people within the community. Not only that, I do a lot of historical research, looking at people's archives in the universities and so forth. And I'd seen no evidence whatsoever of that. But I have had two separately confirmed statements, and I'm being careful what I say here because I'm not allowed to mention any names. I had two very knowledgeable, higher people in the know independently confirm to me that there are certain agencies still using active remote viewing operations, and that's only been in the last 4 or 5 months. So I have to take those statements very credible because the people are very credible. So yeah, I have to assume that my previous 20 years of not being able to find anything whatsoever on an active program is probably superseded, and there probably is. But I think it's probably gone the way of like the UAP research, whereas it's gone into like private subcontracted organizations. So it's not like, it wouldn't be like the NSA or CIA or, anyone got their own remote viewing unit or something. They probably subcontract out to some kind of organization or corporation that gives them data. And you've seen how it is with the reports we've been seeing coming out recently about UAPs. It's probably not even called remote viewing anymore. It's probably called some kind of weird, kind of like, I don't know, non-local information, report number 1 or something like this. It's going to be something innocuous and hidden away. So I do believe now that it is probably happening on a larger scale than I previously believed.
Next question from David Steele. When someone remote views something like UFOs at the very edges of what we understand, how important is it to consider the beliefs of the remote viewer as well as their cultural and social background when analysing the data afterwards?
Yeah, it's very important. And not only the remote viewer, the person tasking the target as well. Again, I'd need to see more research on this, but I'm convinced that if you have a person that's tasking the target who has quite a good psychic or intuitive sensibility themselves, and they have it, and then they also have maybe not so much of an open mind towards the data that they expect to receive. So, almost like they've got a conclusion already set in their mind of what they want to see back. I think it's very possible that they may be in some way influencing the quality of the data that the remote viewer reports, which is why, as I said, independent feedback and feedback information is paramount to assessing the accuracy of the remote viewing.
Next question from Ben. Ben asks, how does opening the Merkabah or light body play a role in remote viewing?
Well, in my classical psychic training, it's a huge part of that. In remote viewing, I would say for me, anyway, no part whatsoever. But interestingly, I've observed that any belief systems you have that might hinder or help what you do psychically, you bring that to the table. So if you believe you have to open your chakras and, have crystals on your knees and palms to do remote viewing, if you believe that, then it might work for you and make you better at doing it. I don't have any belief systems like that. So literally for me, I don't go into a trance or anything. I can, I could remote view, and I have done on a plane, on a coach, on a train, in an office for the people. So I could literally just sit here, have a conversation with you, and at the same time do my remote viewing session on my tablet and do it that way. So for me personally, there's no kind of mystical, esoteric things in any way. It's just like knuckling down and doing a job for me.
It's like finding your own way and what works for you, what allows you to get that kind of best result. Yeah,
absolutely. We're all individuals, and I believe that what your belief system is, you bring that to the table. And if like, for example, there are some people within remote viewing that believe that you can't drink coffee because it's a stimulant and that will affect your remote viewing. Now, because they believe that probably is the case for them. But because I don't, it doesn't bother me. I'll sit there with a cup of coffee or a couple of hot chocolate and just do my thing.
That's good to hear. It's well noted on the podcast. I'm a fan of a Starbucks coffee or 3. So
me too. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for those that have used to buy me a coffee recently. They've been put to good use. Question from Tony: have you ever encountered any entity or being that either detected you? You've mentioned that with the Phoenix Lights in a way, or it was potentially hostile towards you whilst conducting remote viewing?
More so, I had more interactions with negative entities when I was doing my classical psychic stuff before remote viewing. So that was a lot of clairvoyance and guided kind of meditations and channeling. So a lot there. But again, as I said before, that was very spontaneous. The process is in control of you and what you do, rather than you being in control. Because remote viewing and what I do is controlled, I'm in control of the process. Not so much. I did once do a RV session, and it was my first attempt at Area 51 before when I got on video. And I only had a quick look at it, and I did see some kind of grey alien type entity thing lying on a table at something like a 45-degree angle. And as I psychically tried to approach it, it leapt off the table, bounced off the wall, literally like some kind of wild cat type creature. And that freaked me out so much that I did come out of my RV session and like say, whoa, I'm staying way away from that one and not go back. So that and the Phoenix Lights are the only 2 occurrences. And interestingly, they're both non-human, non-physical interactions that managed to do that. I have never had anything like that off a human target in any way.
In those previous, modalities, if you want to call them that, where you did encounter those negative energies, negative spirits, whatever you want to call them, why do you think that was? Is it there's a less of a control in place with those than there is with remote viewing?
Yeah, definitely less of a control structure. It's just the makeup of the way that we were taught to do it then, and the way most people are taught in those classical ways of doing that kind of thing. So you would open up some kind of you would visualize opening up a portal kind of thing, and then you would go out for the portal to investigate, search different realms. And unfortunately, and this needs to be said, there are a lot of life forms that are non-human and non-physical that want to or seem to derive great pleasure from messing around with us on a psychological level. They're tricksters. They like to play jokes. They like to treat us not so nice. I'm not saying that's always the case, but there are those kind of entities out there as well as the good experiences, and you have to be aware of that.
On that same vein and same path, John Coughlin asks us, has the Hitchhiker effect ever been known to manifest in a remote viewing scenario? Do remote viewers take any precautions to avoid any entities kind of catching on to them?
Yeah, I guess some of them do. Again, it's in my belief system is that I'm not going anywhere. I'm just accessing information. So I don't allow that to happen. Once I write, and at the end of every remote viewing session, I write the day, the time I finish, and I write end. And when I'm writing end there on the remote viewing session, it's to give myself like a verbal cue that that's it. This is cut. All connections cut off. No more. And I'm quite strong in doing that. I haven't seen a hitchhiker effect in any way, but I have started asking the question around the community after reading the Skinwalker Pentagon book, because if we are accessing the UAPs and the life forms that are working with them, it might be possible that if we have a belief system that believes that interaction can be physical to us, that we bring that back with us. I mean, I think it needs a study. I have seen some kind of data that I've gathered that I can't really confirm to any great level, that psychics that I've encountered in my 25 years of doing this kind of research, not just remote viewers, but psychics in general, do have quite a lot of very interesting illnesses and diseases like immune diseases. And heart attacks and immune disease and stuff seem to be quite prevalent. Now, I'm only going on kind of information I've ad hoc gathered. I can't confirm that in any way. I would like to see some research on that, but I do think it's a possibility that I've just started discussing with people in the field that we should maybe consider in some way.
Long-time listener Gnosis, who's an ever-present over on the Discord channel. If you compare remote viewing to, for example, the way lucid dreaming is now a recognised and legitimate phenomenon, remote viewing still appears very much a grey and unproven area. What factors do you feel are holding remote viewing back from getting that mainstream recognition?
I think that's a misconception. I don't think it's seen as not being valid. I mean, there's more evidence, documented evidence out there available on the internet and through books for the validity of remote viewing than there is for any other paranormal subject. And I'd probably include UFOs in that as well. I mean, I'm looking at here by the side of me here. I have 4 books called The Stargate Archives, and it's by Dr. Ed May and a couple of other scientists. And it has every major paper that was produced by SRI in the military. So it's probably thousands of pages of papers in chronological order that people can just buy. Or you can go to several places on the internet and download them as FOIA CIA documents. It's the data is there. It's been proved millions of times that remote viewing works.
I think where I would agree with Gnosis, and you're right that the data is there, and of course you can go into the CIA archives and view all sorts of things and experiments and papers. If, for example, Lou Elizondo does one of his appearances on mainstream news, which he's done, and within those he breaks from that really serious nuts and bolts conversation and starts talking about remote viewing, there would be a tone shift, and I feel your news anchors and people would jump on that. So I can see why that sort of area is still almost held back on, in the same way that anyone who claims they've had an experience with beings or entities in terms of the UFO phenomenon isn't still part of the conversation, and they feel again they're not being allowed to have that kind of validity, or this is happening to us because it's still too out there. So I get that aspect of it, because largely I think much of the public, if you explain remote viewing to them, would say, regardless of the data, that sounds like nonsense. Would that still be fair?
It's not my experience, because I'm being hired for it, and for 4 years I've been for 4 years now. It's my full-time job. I work as a remote viewer for the subscribers that kindly pay for us to do these experiments and give them information. So that's not my experience, and it's not my experience from looking at the research as well. And in fact, I would say that up until the New York Times revelations, where UAPs became common, I would say that actually in paranormal and esoteric subject matters, remote viewing had more credibility than UAP research did, and it's only just recently flipped because of the latest stuff that's come out. I mean, for the last 20 years, we had serious remote viewing researchers decrying what I and others did, because we were bringing UAP research and UFOs and aliens into the remote viewing circles, and it was tarnishing remote viewing. Now we're kind of flipped on its head, and it's almost like the UAP people are saying, "Oh, it's tarnishing us if you're bringing remote viewing into it." So it's very strange how that has happened. But yeah, I guess it depends where you are in the world, what you've researched, what you've seen, who you familiarize yourself in day to day. Everyone I know is hardcore into UFOs and paranormal subjects, so I probably have a different viewpoint than the normal person on the street.
No, it's a good response and a good question. Jason from Los Angeles asks, in your experience, do you know if it's possible to interact with someone else who is remote viewing at the exact same time? To your knowledge, has that ever been accomplished in any way?
I've not really seen any evidence in it, and I've looked at tens of thousands of trials. And bear in mind as well, for a lot of the projects I work and everyone else works as well, you work as a team. So someone will set the target blindly, and they'll get 5 remote viewers to all go to that one target, and the target time for it might be the exact same 5 seconds. And in the remote viewing that's recorded on paper, and I've seen this for thousands of projects, I've never seen any of the other remote viewers in their data write down seeing other remote viewers at the target, even though that you've all gone there at the same millisecond.
Have you ever, and I'm trying to remember who I spoke to, it was another remote viewer, they were asked about a remote viewer remote viewing them, or vice versa, and the other person being aware of it and almost turning to acknowledge. Is that something you've ever heard of, or is that something you've not came across?
No, I've heard that is kind of like rumors within remote viewing circles, but I've never seen. I'm a bit more purist and hardcore. I like to before I evaluate anything, I like to see the data on paper and then evaluate it against the project under the right circumstances. So I've seen anecdotal stories from people on it. I've never seen it in any remote viewing data anywhere.
Valis has said that I've heard an experienced remote viewer can affect the health of a person or being. We talked earlier, obviously, about the rumours of the goats' hearts being stopped and whatnot. Famously, Men Who Stare at Goats kind of Hollywoodized that. Yeah. Have you ever considered trying this on an evil person? And they've put like Vladimir Putin, for example. So, politics aside, but I get the tone and what they're asking.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. And there is a subtopic within remote viewing called remote influencing, or the SRI and military called it remote action. And in the official documentation, you'll find hints of it in the CIA archives, but you won't find anything concrete. I know they looked at it, and I know that they tried to get Yuri Getter to do some very dubious stuff. And it wouldn't surprise me if they didn't get others to do it as well. It's not something I've ever done or want to do, because I believe in just not harming people, really. Do no harm and that kind of thing. I do believe it's possible though. We know for a fact, through research, that people when they do absent prayers for people, it's had an effect on the person they're praying for and stuff. And we also know that people have the effect where they can heal themselves, the placebo effect, all that kind of stuff. So we do know that our minds can affect our bodies in some way. I just don't know to what, I haven't seen enough research into what effect and how much, but I do believe it's all possible. But I'd err anyone to be very careful of trying to negatively influence someone else or something else, because that kind of stuff usually comes back to bite you.
Some form of karma, or whatever that word might be in your belief system.
I'm a great believer that the universe tries to live or tries to achieve a state of balance. And for every bad, negative thing you do like that, something might swing your way to readdress that balance.
A really interesting question from Newman. Newman asks, why wasn't the US able to leverage remote viewing for counter-terrorism operations in Afghanistan and Iraq in the 2000s and 2010s if it's such an effective technique? Again, for a bit of context, recall the US hunted bin Laden for 10 years in the Middle East, and he thinks if there was any really substantive claims behind, remote viewing and its effectiveness, the US would have leveraged it for counter-terrorism operations. I suppose that goes for any sort of event like that, including the UK, you know, hunting terrorists and London bombers and such.
Yeah, well, you know, as we discussed earlier, we don't know for a fact that they're not using remote viewers to look at that kind of thing, you know, and there is some kind of more recent evidence from people in the know that they are. And we don't know, you know, we're talking about events here that we get to hear through normal filtered propaganda media. We don't know how many terrorist attacks have been foiled on a year by year basis, and we don't know how they foiled them. It's quite possible, for all we know, you know, 10, 15 events a year may have been prevented by a team of, you know, intelligence agencies, subcontracted remote viewers somewhere. We just don't know about it. And, you know, how would we know about it if they were that secret?
Devil's advocate here, and I'm thinking of both sides of the argument, that you mentioned it's not perfect, and no one has ever claimed remote viewing is perfect. There's the 100% accuracy, so there is the opportunity or chance that the US and other governments and agencies do use remote viewers, but it does take that time, and we don't know that they may or may not have had a hand in finding Bin Laden, Saddam Hussein, and whatnot. On the other hand, there's no real way, and we talked before about you feel that stigma has maybe gone from it and there's a legitimacy, but could the US in all good conscience come out, say for example when they did find Bin Laden, and say actually this wasn't our crack Navy SEAL team or, you know, spies, this was actually, you know, remote viewers who found Bin Laden? That's not going to happen, is it?
Probably not. Like, just in the same regard as they're not coming out and saying that the Tic Tac UFOs are theirs.
And would you say they are?
From remote viewing it in a remote viewing project? No, not at all. But I do believe that some of the UAPs encountered over the last 30 years, in the majority, have been tested craft. You know, and I'm convinced that they have their own versions of these non-human craft that they're flying. You know, based on our technology and a bit of theirs. But we don't know that either. You know, we don't know the extent of what's going on with that, because it's hidden from us.
People will shout at me, Daz, if I don't ask you about the Tic Tac event, and I know it's something that's been talked about to death. I'm speaking to Lou Elizondo. As people hear this, it will be out already. But as we record this, the interview is this Saturday, and it's not something I plan on bringing up, because what more can be said about it in terms of asking people like Lou or Sean Cahill or Gary Voorhees or Kevin Day? They've said all that's to be said, but as a remote viewer, you're viewing the event from a very unique point of view. So again, with that event, what did you manage to view, and what are your takeaways from it?
Yeah, again, I put the video of all the remote viewing online, so people can have a look at that on my channel. But yeah, I observed the craft, you know, and drew a perfect Tic Tac shaped craft. And again, I worked the target blind. I didn't know that this was what I was working when I was given the target. And I show it, you know, going transmedium through different mediums. I showed the energy system of the craft and how it works. And I think I may even go into great detail about how it symbiotically works with the occupant that's driving it as well. In that there's this kind of DNA AI kind of interaction. The craft themselves are not only physical and non-physical at the same time, but there's also a symbiotic intelligence in the craft that you can almost say the craft's a living thing. And it's a symbiotic relationship with the life. So it's not like you get in a car and you drive the car and you're detached from the car. The occupant is the craft, and the craft is the occupant.
A bit more like an Avatar type scenario where you're like symbiotic relationship, or
that's why the movements are so instantaneous, because they're so closely integrated. But yeah, so I detail all that, and again, that's all in a recent video that I put online, probably like 6 weeks ago. And I did speak to briefly to Sean Cahill about it as well, and he said that the remote viewing data is exactly, you know, what they experience, and he said it was very accurate.
I'll do my best, folks, to find the links to all of the videos we've discussed. I've made notes as we've gone along.
What I can do is if you like, if you give me half an hour after this, I'll send you a list of all the best ones that you can look at.
That would be great, yeah, and I'll put those in, especially the Phoenix Lights and the Tic Tac stuff that we've brought
Yeah.
up and discussed would be wonderful.
The 4 projects for all of them are all online, where you can actually see myself and other remote viewers, mainly myself in the ones that I'm putting online because it's my material. But you can actually see the live remote viewing. So literally, I have no idea what the target is. I've got a whiteboard and a video camera, and I'm narrating as I'm doing it, and I'm doing all my remote viewing live on camera, unedited.
I want to ask before we wrap up, Daz, something coming up next for you. You've got a bit of an exciting project in the works that you can't say too much about, but you can say a little. So without me asking too much, I'll hand that over to you.
Yeah, I'm really pleased on it. I didn't remote view on this one. I have because, as I told you, I have all these targets that I want to work, and no one, hardly anyone's ever tasked them. I have a growing list of 86 plus targets that I want to remote view myself, and I think would benefit from being remote viewed. And this was one of the ones on the list, and I set it for my group of remote viewers at Crypto Viewing, and they got some amazing results on it. And it's essentially a UAP event that's caught on video film, and at the same time as the UAP is caught on video film, there's some kind of weird cow mutilation type thing happening at the same time as well. So I wanted them to look at the event and see what the interaction was there, see if there was an interaction or if it was just a coincidence, and see what they came up with. And the data that we'll be showing in about 3 weeks' time, live remote viewing done blindly, as I said, is amazing, because you will actually see all the remote viewers describe a physical and sometimes non-physical dimensional craft in the sky, high technology. They'll describe all these interacting with frequencies and rays of light. They're doing all kinds of strange biological stuff, to a life form, and it's very, very interesting.
Now, without giving anything away, have you spoken to the people who would have been there or around that area at the time about this event?
Not yet, but I have access to those people. I made a first inquiry into that. The video, the full video production doesn't exist yet. It's still in production. So as soon as I have a full version of it that I'll be able to show them, I'm going to try to contact the people involved through some of the various groups I'm in, to see if I can get some kind of statements from them in some way.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to that, and when you announce it, we'll make sure we put it out on the podcast as well on one of the breakdowns or news updates. Absolutely.
I mean, and if you're up for it, it may be interesting to get some of the team of remote viewers to tell you what they experienced in that. I'm sure they'd come along and do that.
100%. That would be great. Dan is really interested in remote viewing, and right now has the time to. He's going to be taking part in Simeon Hein's remote viewing class over at newcrystalmind.com. Dan and Simeon's very kindly offered, if anyone wants to do the course, newcrystalmind.com, they can get $50 off using 50 RV. Dan's going to be doing it and talking about it on the show as well. Expectations, how the course went. So he's very much looking forward to that. So yeah, that would be great if the folks that you're working with and you're involved with want to come on and talk about the project when they can in a bit more detail. I would love that as well.
I'll absolutely arrange that for you. That'd be no problem.
Daz, how can people follow you and also follow your work?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we're doing quite a lot of work with my team through crypto viewing, and you can find that on patreon.com/crypto viewing. And that's, cryptos, markets, a few mysteries targets, and lots of news predictions. So, it's a smorgasbord. The rest of the information, if you go to YouTube and type in remoteviewed.com or remote viewed on YouTube, sorry, I have a channel there with something like 150 videos on there, talks and interviews and lots of remote viewing examples. And I also have a website called remoteviewed.com, and on there you can find a template and a video to teach yourself how to do it. You can find tens of thousands of pages of CIA documentation. Pretty much anything you'd ever want to know about remote viewing is on there, including hundreds of my remote viewing sessions for you to download as well.
Well, it's been great talking to you. Very interesting. I know I've got a lot of listeners just from the Twitter feed who have an interest in the crypto side of things as well. So they'll no doubt be checking that out. And yeah, we'll get those links on there for you folks. And if you're watching on the YouTube, hi, thank you for watching along. And again, those links should also be in the description for you. Daz, thanks for joining us on what is the 2-year anniversary of the podcast. It's been a wonderful conversation.
It's been great fun. Yeah, I look forward to doing it again, and thank you.
We definitely will. Speak to you soon.
Yeah, take care.
That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/That UFO podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at ufouapam. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a Tic Tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little Baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little around. Meditative game of state full on meta. Can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. I'm like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. And I called out to my boys. They thought this was noise. They thought it was a dream. They thought it was my toys. They thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what to do because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think I be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jake? But for being serious, open your mind, consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life.